us to Lone Rock. We are back at White Pocket here. All right, so it is 6 o'clock on Tuesday. I up and at 'em here this morning. We are not going to a sunrise this morning. This morning is we are going back to Antelope Canyon. All right, so we made it out to Horseshoe Bend this morning again, and we were headed to, I've heard this called, the guys have called this both Reflection Canyon and Coal Mine Canyon. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. I'll ask and put it in the, well, I'll pop it up here below me. All right, made it to Sedona. Well, we made it to that slick something place that I still haven't figured out exactly what the name is. All right, so I am walking down from Airport Mesa back at it for what will be sunset, and our subject again is Cathedral Rock, but rather than being up high, we're kind of down low right along the waterway. The group has decided on a bonus trip, so we are going to head out. So if at this point you're wondering, what the HE double hockey sticks are you doing, Jay? The truth is, I'm wondering the same thing. I started to edit the back half of the Arizona workshop, and at first I tried to fix all of the problems I was seeing with the footage with a 3-part instead of a 2-part session, but the truth of the matter is I did an absolute horrible job of B-roll and finding some story to anything beyond, look at me in this new location and here's a photo I took, and look at me in this other new location and here's a photo I took. And frankly, it was horribly boring for me to sit here and edit. I couldn't possibly ask any of you to sit through that. So this wasn't a fault of Mike, Chris, or anyone but myself. In truth, I struggled with this exact same thing when I went on another photography workshop to the Faroe Islands. And the issue, I think, is that the moment I clicked that purchase button for both of those workshops, I sort of let Jesus take the wheel, and I no longer gave much care nor concern beyond getting my photography gear ready and getting my rear end to the start of the event. And the problem with that is when you're minus the planning stages and the preparation, it's tough to stitch together the story. I knew where we were, but even there, with a lot of the footage, I really struggled to keep track of that. So instead of that disconnected story where I just talked about photos and you see me standing in epic landscapes, I thought I'd do something different, and this is that something different. Instead, I'm going to share some of the photos that I took and the problems that I have with them. I got so caught up in the moment and some of the anxieties of being dropped off in an amazing location that I hadn't necessarily seen before that I really struggled with some images and made some very rookie mistakes. Mike and Chris and Brennan were there to help quite often. But even after that, when I got back here to my computer and I started editing the images, I would think, geez, I wish I had made this one change. It would have made that better, at least better to me. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to jump into the computer, kind of continue this voiceover approach, and share some of the screw-ups I made on my own. And that's one thing I would say, if you do a photography workshop, I learned a tremendous amount at both workshops that I did. But if you think you're going to make epic photos, you may. I don't want to say you will. There is some weird anxiety that I felt in both locations, and while I was in a wonderful landscape, I did feel like both in Arizona and in the Faroe Islands I struggled, and I just wasn't my creative self. So anyway, with some time to think and review my photos again, I've decided, man, I wish this is what I'd done. And with that, let's jump in. I'm going to begin with my first composition attempt at Lone Rock. And This one wasn't so bad, but it also wasn't great. I sort of jumped on the first thing that hit me or struck me, and that was this leading line that sort of pointed up towards Lone Rock from a little waterway off to the side. And it really is obvious, and I got rushed a little bit, and if I could redo it, my issue is this center area here that really, quite simply, could have been resolved by lowering my camera a bit. It would have pinched down this upper area and lower area, and if I pseudo recreate that in Photoshop, as I've done here with some layer masking, I think you'll see that it's actually a lot better composition for the image. And this is one of those, I just sort of plopped there. I liked the leading line. I went right for it. I wasn't overly compelled because the sky wasn't doing much. And in the end, I even left it a little bit early. So that being said, it wasn't all bad. My second composition I liked quite a bit more, and there was a small little red bush with that same waterway, but rather than even trying to use the water as a leading line, I just used sort of the sandy berm and used the rule of thirds a bit more. And I liked this so much more with the longer lens. It compressed that scene a little bit. I got that little bit lower, and I wouldn't call this a banger, but this ended up being the image that I wish I had taken just a little bit more time and focused on instead of that first one that struck me immediately. The next location I'd like to talk about where I didn't think I struggled at the time but ultimately did was Antelope Canyon X. And this was actually my second time in the area, not this particular canyon, but still to the Antelope Canyons themselves. And both times I just really enjoyed the visit, but struggled to convey the story of the canyons with the photos that I took. Now, the first time I blamed it completely on the fact I was using a point and shoot and really hadn't even dove into photography, at least being serious about it. This time I was excited because it wasn't the typical tour. It was a photography tour where we had more time, and I had all the time in the world to set up and do what I wanted. I took some far away shots. I took several detailed photos, yet none of them really convey the way I would have liked the scale of the canyon, and I think that's a huge missing element. I wished I had taken more photos of, if nothing else, the other photographers in the canyon to have added some scale to what you're seeing so that you have an idea of what it looks like. I don't know, maybe I'll do that on the third trip someday. The following day we headed out to Secret, Slick Rock, and Sedona for sunset. This was a pretty amazing location. My first composition that you're seeing there I liked quite a bit, other than the sky was a little flat, and I was at this time concerned about the evening as a whole. My second composition, I moved over to where there's some reflections, but you're going to see 1, 2, that's right, 3 cameras slowly developed in the lower corner of my frame, and it was pretty easy for me to Photoshop those out, so I wasn't too horribly worried about it. But all of a sudden it hit me that there's already 3 other people taking a photo of this location, so I'm going to go find something else. The something else was this composition, and this is more of a success story than anything for me. It was really tough to stay looking at the rocks and in the direction that I was with this composition, and that's because the sky off 90 degrees from this way was absolutely lighting up and on fire. Unfortunately, I hadn't really come up with any compositions or anything that would capitalize on that color. shortly after this composition, because the sky was so magnificent, I scrambled to try to find a few other compositions. I've got that one there that you just saw, and then I did find one with just a small cactus in front where I tried to let what remained of the light in the sky be the show. The lesson here for me was it's okay, don't freak out, and if you have a composition that you like, it really is worth waiting all the way through the sunset for that light to potentially explode. But I'm not going to lie, this was very, very difficult to have done, to do in that moment. But with that mild success, or at least what I'm going to take as a mild success out of the way, the following day we were looking back again at Cathedral Rock, but this time from a lower elevation and sort of along a waterway or stream. And I almost immediately upon arrival fell in love with a little offset of water from the main water flow. The main water flow was moving towards the left of this frame, but there was this little outlet that sort of kicked off and went along some grooves in the rocks and created some little water flow, little waterfalls, or little rushing. And in that, I could see where there was some texture of the rock below it, and I really loved that color and wanted to focus in on that. Ultimately, the thing I don't like about this image is completely out of my control. The trees I'm fine with in the mid-ground of the image, but I wish they had actually some foliage, some green or something else to sort of help complement the reds and dark oranges of the rock. Obviously, I can't make that happen since we were there in the winter now. Brendan Vanson had a similar image. He was just a little bit further downstream and wanted more of the moving water and sort of waterfalls. And what he did was he lowered his camera to a point where he essentially removed that mid-ground entirely. And that really worked for his image, for me, and the composition that I liked. I liked being a little bit further upstream in this location. I just wish those trees had a little bit more. Recognizing that I couldn't correct that, I left this location somewhat early with light in the hopes to head upstream to try to get a different composition or look from the rest of the group that was hanging out in this area. I did ultimately come to an area that I came to love. There was a couple of compositions I took here, and this is one that I wanted to work the most. I knew when I set my camera up in this location that the yucca cactus or yucca plant had stalks that were going to take your eye up and out of the image to the right. What I had hoped, and when I set my camera there, was that I saw some white clouds at the time that were sort of in a diagonal streak pattern and appearing to stretch out even more. And I had hoped that as the wind moved those from right to left, that they would come over Cathedral Rock. And I had hoped that they would create an element that would bring your eye, once it got up into the flower portion of the stalk, that maybe you would follow those white clouds back across the top of Cathedral Rock, ultimately to land on the white bark or lighter tree just below it and to the left of the frame, sort of having your eyes work as a triangle shape or a triangle pattern. I had no idea that the sky was going to light up and those clouds would ultimately turn this beautiful pinkish purple. And from the back of my camera, I was really quite excited about this image, still sort of worrying about what your eye may do. I've went ahead and I edited it and I worked on it some, but in the end, I just don't think my eyes anyway work the way I thought they should. I sort of run up those stalks and just sit there. I have a hard time moving back across that diagonal line. I think it's just too far in the background, and in the end, it just didn't work. Now, out of desperation and still with a beautiful sky all around me, although quite near dark, I turned around on the cactus, sat down real low, and almost 180 degrees, at least somewhere more than 90. I took a picture of another cactus that was like right behind the one I'd seen, the one in the previous image. It was so dark and I was working so quick that I didn't really pay any attention to the mid-ground again. And between the mountain or hill on the left and then the trees on the right, is, in spite of the fact that the sky is gorgeous, and honestly I like the yucca plant or cactus in the foreground, the midground just muddies it up. So while the sky was great, I didn't leave with any image here. So lots of things learned, but no banger images earned. Well, there you go. I think that's enough rambling on and whining about the photos that I took on this trip. I think you and I will both agree that this type of video is less than ideal. However, I had made so many promises about sharing this trip that I didn't want it to be like my Faroe Islands trip that I ultimately, or at least have yet to, never deliver. So anyway, that's it. In spite of potential boringness, let me know what you think in the comments. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, bonus points for ringing that bell. Hopefully back to a more regularly scheduled program with a little more pizzazz next week. Have a good one.